Nayunako vekevon.
Well, hey again. All right, so we're here now for an interesting purpose, okay? It's going to be interesting stuff. We're not going to deal with like the language itself per se, or the decipherment itself per se. I'm here to kind of expose not necessarily a person, rather an argument against the decipherment work that our two Macedonian academics did in deciphering the middle text of the Rosetta Stone as ancient Macedonian language. So here you have a guy called Petar Illievski. He's a scholar and he's a linguist. So he's a linguist, he knows everything about languages, and he knows everything, not just about languages, but about the engineering work or the engineering ability one has to have whenever he's decoding a certain type of encoded thing, right? So this guy is Petar Illievski. I want to show this guy to you guys, so give me 1 second. Just so that you know who we're dealing with here. Whoa. Okay. Here we go. So this is Petar Illievski. This guy right here. Boy, those glasses surely look like he's screaming communism, man. But like, hey, who am I? You know, I don't know anything. I'm not a linguist. So you don't know anything. Shut up. All right. But this is the guy apparently debunked our two Macedonian academics, our two great scholars, two great engineers. But I want to read his critique, and I want to deconstruct it and then debunk it. So we're going to dive today into the critique of Professor Petar Illievski, a scholar that has publicly attacked the groundbreaking work of Tentov and Boshevski on the ancient Macedonian language. Because I've encountered many skeptics showing this critic of Petar Illievski, you know, most likely a communist to me. If you have that, that's just me, you know. And as a communist, man, they are prone to mental submissiveness. So I'm just gonna say that. That's it. And it's just so interesting how these skeptics, I'm not talking about Petar Illievski, I'm talking about people that present this argument as a valid argument, that are not usually Macedonian. They're either Greek or hey, lo and behold, even Albania today. What? Let's hang out. Let's see what we can get out as a truth. So they're so quick to accept this guy's credentials as a long-lasting linguist without critically examining his views. So they just throw it in there. They read it somewhere that it's a critic to these guys' work, and so they're just gonna throw it to you. All right. But on the other side, they're so quick to dismiss Tentov and Boshevski's engineering capabilities that include decoding abilities greater than any linguist has to have. You know what I mean? It's one thing to know about languages, and it's another thing to decode something. Those are two different worlds. You can have a linguist while you're an engineer decoding stuff in a linguistic subject, let's say, so that they can help you out to validate your stuff. That's exactly what our two Macedonian academics did. They had a bunch of linguists, they consulted a bunch of linguists, they consulted a bunch of linguists in Russia as well. And so they validated their work, in a sense. Interesting. But be that as it may, in this video, I'll break down this guy's, Petar Illievski's objections, expose the flaws in his reasoning, and show why Tentov and Boshevski's scientific work and methodology stands strong despite attempts to dismiss it. If you've ever wondered how modern Macedonian or modern researchers can reconstruct a lost language from fragments, take a look at my videos that I've previously made, and also stick around because we're going to dismantle this critique point by point and reveal the truth about the ancient Macedonian tongue. Okay, so let's start by reading Illievski's text. So he has the mentioned work, the deciphered work of the two Macedonian academics, which is the project tracing the script and the language of the ancient Macedonians, is in fact from the same category as the publications from the beginning of 90s, with the only difference that the latter were published in second-rate editorial houses, and this one in an official edition of the Academy. Now, to that I'll say, objectivity is not determined. This is crazy. A guy at his rank that you skeptics so highly, consider, is not seeing that objectivity is not determined by the prestige of publishing houses, unless I'm missing something here. What matters is the reproducibility of results obtained through the scientific method, which renders this objection irrelevant. It doesn't have any weight at all. It's just like, I've wasted a couple of minutes of your life for no good reason. It's crazy. But this is just the beginnings, guys. So let's stick around and see. He continues to say, albeit inspired by Grinovich ideas, and Grinovich is a Russian guy that kind of talks about their runic inscriptions. Now, the runic inscriptions, or the runic script, it has many, if not 90% similar symbols with the Demotic script, which supposedly should have been Egyptian, right? Well, I'm not saying there isn't an Egyptian language written in Demotic script. I'm talking precisely about the middle text of the Rosetta Stone in Demotic script, but apparently, based per the latest discovery of our two Macedonian academics, it is written in Demotic script, but in Macedonian language. Now, this Grinovich guy, he studies those runic inscriptions and comes to the conclusion that we're talking about a language or a script that's widely used, even down to Crete. does stuff like that. So you got one group of people using it from the Baltics down to Crete, and then from like mid-Europe until the Ural Mountains and things like that. So this guy, Petar Illievski, says that these Macedonian academics were inspired by Grinović ideas, and their work is pretentious to being considered as a scholarly study. They have done great efforts to redecipher the middle text of the Rosetta Stone, but their approach was wrong, just because. And the results are of a quasi-scientific value, just because I say so. You see what I did there? Without taking into consideration the development of the languages and historical reality, ignoring centuries-long studies of the ancient Macedonian, the authors, or the two Macedonian academics, tried to identify it with southern dialects of the contemporary Macedonian language. Right from the get-go, I'm going to start, they did not try to identify it, they discovered those. And we're going to get into that. Now, oh boy, the work of academics Boshevski and academic Tentov is a scholarly work, simply because it follows the principles of the scientific method and it has reproducible results. Period. Our authors, Boshevski and Tentov, themselves trained academics, carefully considered both linguistic evolution and historical reality in their approach. They did not ignore earlier studies, but challenged them on the basis of internal inconsistencies and contradictions with ancient sources. So what we have here, they've observed, which is one of the first steps of the scientific method, observed that there were inconsistencies within the interpretations of mainstream when compared to ancient sources. So our academics try to follow the scientific method rigorously in order to gain objective results. Okay. Now, I've mentioned this rigorous application of the scientific method that these two Macedonian academics applied in details in one of my previous videos, so I advise that you go and check them out. But because of all this, they discovered the archaic version of the Macedonian language, which means that the words are etymologically broken down compared to the modern Macedonian words. And names discovered in the text are more descriptive compared to their modern counterparts, which is what is, precisely expected in older languages, the names to be descriptive. Note I said they discovered and not invented, because they built up the sounds from the symbols, then the syllables from the symbols, depending on the symbols' rotations, then words. They build up the words from the gained syllables. So let me repeat that. They first build up the sounds from the symbols, then the syllables from the symbols, and lastly, they build the words from the gained syllables. There is no way one can create this premeditatively and come up with a huge body of text like the middle text of the Rosetta Stone with unchanging rules and symbols, sounds, always within the socio-religious context of the very era the Rosetta Stone was built in. There's no way of premeditatively inventing this decipherment work. It's impossible. Because you would have to change rules, you have to change symbols, sounds, and things like that. Oh boy. All right, but let's continue. To make this even, more irritating for our skeptics, right? The same method of deciphering and reading was used on the stones that are called that were of the same era or the same age, which was the Macedonistic era, and those are the stones of Canopus. And they reveal the same meaningful, reproducible results using the same method and the same decipherment method as used in the middle text of the Rosetta Stone. All right, so far so good. So I would say that objectivity of the results, it screams in our faces based on the approach these academics took, which is in many ways similar to the approach Egyptologists take when they decipher the hieroglyphs. The very Oriental Institute speaks about their approach, and you can see that, you can find that online. It's almost point to point the same with the approach the Macedonian academics took, right? Now, examples of the ancient Macedonian words being etymologically broken down compared to the modern Macedonian words would be the following example. So we have 3 words in ancient Macedonian, and that is nashi ve. This translates into on stone made or embroidered in stone. Now, Macedonians refer to themselves as the sacred animals, or jo, which means sacred animals. Jo means sacred animals. And also they call themselves yunza, which even in modern Macedonian language means young bulls. So needless to say, here the symbol that gives the syllable jo looks like the Latin Z, the ancient Macedonian symbol that gives the syllable jo. It looks like the Latin Z. It's a little bit curved, but it's the same form. Now, combined with the double O, we get the modern place where we keep our animals, which is the zoo. Just saying it out there, just some food for thought for y'all, okay? But all this means that the Macedonians thought they were eternal, or the memory of them was eternal, and the ancient way of deification was to be embroidered in stone. So far, so good. We have the ancient socio-religious context preserved here. Now, that is exactly what nashive transliterates to, and its etymologically non-broken form, or in modern Macedonian, nashive means ours, or of our kin, of our kind. When we say in modern Macedonian, means our Macedonians. Now, when you compare that they were talking about the Macedonians in terms of the ones who are embroidered on stone, you can see the clear parallel here. This is just one of many examples where we have a primitive phrase presented in a single modern word consisting of the same pieces that phrase contains. The latter example for a descriptive name would be the name of Ptolemy, about which I've written in my previous videos. You can go and check them out. But here it is again. His full name is Ptolemy, or Ptolemaios in ancient Greek, Epiphanes Eucharistos. This Koine Greek, in Koine Greek, this means Ptolemy is warlike, and we can debate about this, but let's just grant it, it's warlike. Eucharist is Holy Communion, or Divine Communion, or Best Communion. Epiphanes is glorious, or elevated, or honored. In Macedonian, the similarities is eerily there, similar. It's obvious. Because we have, for the name of Ptolemy, the first part is apotol nashi cha yemo, for Ptolemy, which translates to from a stony field, our pasture is our great mother. Some say that the original Koine Greek name Ptolemy, or Ptolemaios, is connected to the goddess Maya, or goddess of fertility and motherhood, which is equivalent to the great mother there. So there may be something there. This is just a conjecture, because I don't know if we have any ancient sources confirming this. Either way, in ancient Macedonians, we have also a perfect equivalent to the Koine Greek Epiphanes, which means glorious, and that is naitse. Nai is the superlative, which is the same in modern Macedonian as well. Naitse means the most honored one, or in modern Macedonian we would say naitsenet. The Greek Epiphanes also means glorious, and another way of saying it is by saying the most honored one. Okay, and I'll tell you why this is important and I'm talking about here. Lastly, the Greek Eucharist or Eucharistos means Holy Communion. It has its Macedonian equivalent of naiseme. Again, nai meaning a superlative, seme means seed, or it's another way of saying a family. I believe Russian languages now they still have seme or something for family, really similar. But be that as it may, Naiseme would translate to from the most beautiful or from the best family. It's a perfect way of saying a holy, divine, or best communion, which will equals Eucharist. So, the results of centuries-old studies are precisely coming back to this Petar Illievski critic. They are precisely the reason why our academics undertook this monumental work. They found the consistencies within the couple of centuries of studies that we have with the ancient sources. So there are inconsistencies again with relatively modern interpretation of ancient sources. That's what they've noticed, because ancient sources, ancient texts say that Macedonians were barbaric or foreign in the true meaning of the word to the Danos Hellenes, to the ancient Greeks. Macedonians also, per ancient sources, spoke different language than all of the Danos Greeks, Danos Hellenes put together. Macedonians had different burial rituals. Imagine that. If you're the same culture, the very burial rituals would stay the same, man, or at least not wholly separate. You know what I mean? It doesn't make any sense. Also, there are customs like drinking unmixed wines that kind of differentiate the Macedonians from all of the Greeks together. Not just some of them. Boy, so the establishment of their hypothesis, of the two Macedonian academics' hypothesis, was warranted just because of the inconsistencies that they discovered or observed. Far from being quasi-scientific, this scientific work expands upon centuries of testimony. Expands upon centuries of scholarship by addressing where older studies fail to align with historical testimony or linguistic logic. The objection that it is pretentious or unscholarly collapses under scrutiny. The methodology is reproducible, the results linguistically sound, and the conclusions historically consistent. Mind you, if we are missing hard empirical data, it is well known in the scientific world that you would infer by using philosophy of science, you would infer to the best logical explanation. So just have that in mind. Now, the charge of quasi-scientific value is purely unfounded by this guy. Scientific work is judged by method and reproducibility, not by whether it confirms entrenched assumptions. It's ridiculous. On all accounts, Boshevski and Tentov's research stands as legitimate scholarship research, and the objection is therefore obsolete, really. Now, the reason I've went through all that yunza and all that descriptive names, just to kind of show the far back as you go, you would find the words more etymologically broken down. That's expected in every language. That's precisely what we have, what our two Macedonian academics discovered. The more further back you go in time, the more you would find our modern Macedonian words, but etymologically broken in different words, but with the same context. Just like nashive with nashive. Now let's advance this to the Petar Illievski's next critique. So he says They, the Macedonian academics, started from a personal supposition which unfortunately depends on a superficially read and erroneously understood some historical realities, and the wrong steps done in the start brought the authors in the state of knocking an open door. They consider the demotic script being universal, assigned for writing state documents, and that it was used not only in Egypt but in Persia too. If it is so, then they might have concluded why it would not be used for writing text in the language of the ruling dynasty in Egypt, who were the Macedonians, without paying attention to the notorious fact of which kind the educational policy by the Ptolemaic dynasty was carried out in literary and scientific center of Alexandria. They deduced that the middle text of the Rosetta Stone was written in ancient Macedonian language and began to search for proofs to support their own opinion. In fact, the findings are quite different. There are several wrong starting positions. A static view to the living language essence. So apparently these Macedonian academics took this wrong position, which was a static view of the living language essence. All right, riddle me that. Number B, not corresponding spacious and temporal allocation of historical events. You know, the more confusing it sounds, people think the more intellectual it is. C, rejecting scientifically proven facts without any argument, only because they do not coincide with their conception. Isn't that what this guy just did? Just gonna leave it there. Now, let's go about and debunk this. So they started from a personal supposition which unfortunately depends on the superficially read and erroneously understood some historical realities. And the wrong steps done in the start, which we mentioned, the static stuff and all that, the authors brought the authors in a state of knock on an open door. It's like, oh, I see this. Oh, it must be Macedonian. It's like he neglects all the methodology that's explained that these Macedonians applied. But let me not read it again. Let me go and kind of explain it to you guys why this is wrong on so many levels. Now, the claim that Boshevski and Tentov began from a personal supposition misrepresents their approach, as I just mentioned. Their starting point was not arbitrary, like these guys suggests, but based on a well-documented historical reality. The Demotic script was the administrative script of Egypt, used for contracts, decrees, taxes, and official communication for centuries. This is a well-known fact. To dismiss this possibility that it could carry the language of the ruling dynasty, the Macedonians, it's either careless or deliberately blind to evidence. Numerous papyri and decrees confirm this. If Demotic served as a medium for state communication, then now going back to the philosophy of science interpretation again, it is entirely reasonable to consider whether it could also record the language of the ruling dynasty, which was the Macedonian dynasty. This is not knocking on an open door, but posing a valid and testable hypothesis. The objection also assumes that the Ptolemaic educational policies in Alexandria somehow preclude the use of Macedonian. On the contrary, the cultural dominance of Greek in Alexandria does not erase the possibility that the Macedonian ruling elite used their own language in state or dynastic context, especially given that bilingual and trilingual inscriptions, hieroglyphic, demotic, Greek, were common in Egypt. This is to say that Romans never spoke their Latin language simply because lingua franca at that time was Koine Greek. All right. We have to endure this, guys. It is what it is. Now, the critic waves around the educational policy of Alexandria as it somehow erases Macedonian identity. But Alexandria, being a multicultural hub, does not mean that Macedonian ruling class stopped speaking their own language. This is like basic logic. On the contrary, empires often used multiple scripts and languages in parallel, something we see all over the ancient world. Pretending otherwise is historical reductionism made on the part by this Petar Illievski guy. Now, the accusation of wrong starting position is equally misplaced, for the lack of a better term. Now, on the language as static, Tentov and Boshevski explicitly recognize linguistic evolution, showing how ancient Macedonian words break down etymologically into forms still recognizable in modern Macedonian. This is what I've talked about earlier about the nashive and nashive and the descriptive name stuff. The dynamic view of language is exactly what one expects in historical linguistics, which what we find in the ancient Macedonian language, discovered in the middle text of the Rosetta Stone. Claiming the authors had a static view of the language is, guys, it's laughable. It's laughable. They explicitly demonstrated linguistic development by finding broken down ancient Macedonian words into etymological units, but still present in modern Macedonian words. That's the exact opposite of static, for the ones that don't know what static is. Now, on the historical context, far from misplacing events, Tentov and Boshevski's work is rooted in ancient testimony that consistently distinguishes Macedonians from Hellenes in language, in customs, in identity. Now, we have that all over ancient sources. The interpretation of those sources is what's problematic. But if you look at them just at face value, the first thing that comes to your mind is that Macedonians weren't Hellenes, because the Hellenes considered them not Hellenes. Anyway, accusing two Macedonian academics of misplacing events is kind of empty rhetoric, Ancient sources themselves distinguish Macedonians from Hellenes, as I mentioned, in language, customs, and identity. The critics ignore, this critic ignores those sources, not Tentov and Boshevski. So there's that. On the rejecting established scholarship, oh boy. Now, questioning scientifically proven facts is the very engine of science, and a guy like this, Petar Illievski, should have seen this coming. It's ridiculous. The history of linguistics shows repeatedly that established paradigms fall when confronted with new data and new interpretations. Their critique of older studies is therefore legitimate. Now, what the objection dismisses as a personal supposition is in fact a scientific hypothesis tested by methods. Now, this guy says that our two Macedonian academics have a personal supposition, but yeah, you would have to have a supposition presented as a hypothesis to be tested. And lo and behold, when this Macedonian hypothesis was tested, which was that the middle text of the Rosetta Stone is actually different language, made in the language of the ruling class at that time. Now, they didn't presuppose what the nature of that language is. They just said it's a different language, and it's the language of the ruling class, which was the Macedonian. Now, they didn't say it's a Slavic language. They discovered that. So, what they presented is a hypothesis tested by method. As I mentioned, they first categorized the symbols. Then from the symbols, they discovered the sounds. From the sounds, they discovered the syllables. From the syllables, they've connected the words. So all of this is discovered. It's not manufactured. It's not invented premeditatively. The ancient Macedonian language was discovered from the ground up Hence, one cannot predict the outcome of the context. This means that Tentov and Boshevski couldn't have been led by personal suppositions. Their only presumption was, and they have stated this online, you can find it if you know Macedonian, you can clearly see it, that the vowel sounds didn't change, which is pretty basic. It doesn't give you much. Most of the vowels don't change in most of the languages. So that would indicate, also the reproducibility of the results and the clear parallels between the reconstructed language, or the ancient Macedonian language, and the modern Macedonian indicate that their conclusions are not inventions but discoveries. And the charge of rejecting scientifically proven facts made by Petar Illievski is the most hypocritical of all, since advances precisely by because science precisely advances by questioning dogmas. And this guy kind of looks like a mighty gatekeeper, if you ask me. Now, the facts the critics defend are nothing more than untested assumptions that collapse the moment real linguistic reconstruction is implied, just like what our Macedonian academics did. So, there's nothing there either, guys. All of this is like strawman arguments. It's like, I don't know, elementary kid can do this. This objection misunderstands both the historical role of the demotic script and the scientific method. There's a basic misunderstanding of the scientific method by this Petar Illievski guy, and look no further than that, guys. But far from being pretentious, Boshevski's and Tentov's work takes a courageous step. It re-examines entrenched assumptions with fresh eyes and rigorous analysis. That is the essence of scholarship, by the way. Boshevski and Tentov did not invent their results. They derived them systematically. First they get the symbols, from the symbols they get the sounds, from the sounds they get the syllables, from the syllables they got the words. They could not have predicted the overarching context. This is a method from ground up, not fantasy, guys. Their results are reproducible. One of the key factors that you need to have when you're using the scientific method and when you're gaining results by the scientific method, your method needs to be, or the results gained by that scientific method need to be reproducible. And that's precisely what we have here. And they align with what one expects of an archaic language, of a living language. Now, when I say reproducible, I mean, as I mentioned, they did test this method of deciphering gained by the scientific method on the two stones of Canopus, which were of the same Ptolemaic era. So there's that. Now, the next objection by Petar Illievski is this. It seems that the authors, Petar Boshevski and Tentov, did not understand the name of the oldest sub-period of the Demotic script, and admitted that this script was also used in Persia. But in Persia, then cuneiform written was in use, deciphered in 1835, as if this was the only script used in Persia. And mind you, he's talking about how the Macedonian academics claim that the Demotic script was used, I believe, as an administrative script. But let me continue reading, never mind. But in Persia, then cuneiform was in use, deciphered in 1835 by H.C. Rawlinson. All right, a diplomat and a perfect Orientalist. Where's the linguist in this? Through the trilingual inscription of Darius the Great, the Persian text was written not with Egyptian Demotic universal script, but with cuneiform writing. The way of decipherment was quite identical with the one of the Rosetta Stone, mainly by the comparison of personal names. The objection that Boshevski and Tentov misuse demotics shows a profound misunderstanding of both history and linguistics by this guy. Demotic was the administrative script of Egypt, used for official decrees, contracts, and correspondence, and it coexisted with Koine Greek and Ptolemaic Egypt. But also, demotic symbols resemble characters from other Mediterranean and Near Eastern scripts, a natural consequence of cultural contact and diffusion. You with me so far? Now, this is not a flaw, it's a strength. It demonstrates that Tentov and Boshevski were justified in exploring the possibility that the demotic script could encode Macedonian language, especially for a ruling dynasty whose language coexisted with Koine in the same political space. To claim that it was not universal or irrelevant outside of Egypt is simply false, because we find it in the stones of Ashoka even. That's in Hindu Kush over there. And there are many, many instances where we find the demotic script. When I say demotic script, I don't mean symbol by symbol the same. I mean most of this script's symbols are contained in other scripts. This Petar Illievski's insistence that demotic could never carry Macedonian is pure dogma, guys. It's a way of gatekeeping. It's obvious. A gatekeeping of sorts. Tentov and Boshevski follow the scientific method, and their results are reproducible and consistent with historical linguistic evolution. The objection dismisses this rigorous methodology completely. He just ignores it, relying instead of strawmen and selective facts, the ones that only he would like to show to you. The real error of this critique lies not with Boshevski and Tentov, but with the critiques who refuse to acknowledge the administrative role of demotic, the cross-cultural nature of Mediterranean scripts, and the legitimacy of reconstructing language systematically from inscriptions. To attack the Macedonian academics on these grounds is intellectual laziness. It's not scholarship, okay? Now, the next critic we have coming from Petar Illievski is this. In the consonantism, there are more differences. The final R, stable in Greek as CF, which is, for example, the word aether, disappears in Macedonian ade. Now he's using the Macedonian glosses known by mainstream, which are around 7-ish, which is still highly debated whether those are genuine Macedonian words or not. It's highly debated whether those are genuine ancient Macedonian words, and they are found in a tense that they cannot determine. So debate that, whether it's an ancient Macedonian word actually, or whether it's an actual form of Greek or Hellenic. Now he goes to say, while the aspirate occlusives in Greek are well preserved, in Macedonian they lose aspiration, and a kind of Lotvenspung appears. So, say is the more unrecognizable words you say, the more intellectual you sound. Similar to that of Phrygian and Gothic. So thus, in example, BH in Greek becomes PH. In Macedonian, kebale in Greek is. So, for example, if it's in BH in Macedonian, it's PH in Greek. So, for example, you have kebale. In Greek, you got kephale, which means head. Another example that he presents is Macedonian DH. In Greek is TH. So you have Macedonian danos, and you have in Greek thanatos. which means death. You have another example that he presents, which is in Macedonian is GH. So those letters are used to form a certain sound. And in Greek is KH. So in Macedonian we have agerdos. In Greek we have akerdos, akerdas, which means wild pear. It is remarkable, he moves on to say, that in the redeciphered Macedonian text, he used this redeciphered in quotations because he doesn't believe in it, none of these documented features appear. Okay, so they don't appear, so the whole thing must fall down because it's probably not true, because none of these 3 or 4 words appear in this deciphered text. Shoot me. All right. To this, I'll have to say that this objection is a textbook example of arguing from silence. It's a weak rhetorical trick rather than a substantive a critique that has substance. It's not. The claim that certain consonantal features of Greek are missing, rather of consonantal features of a known Macedonian per mainstream are missing in the redeciphered ancient Macedonian text of the Rosetta Stone ignores several crucial facts. First, the mainstream corpus of Macedonian glosses is ridiculously sparse. So we barely have, we cannot, per mainstream, they cannot reconstruct the ancient Macedonian language because not enough words, and not enough words in different forms and different tenses, so they don't know. No serious scholar claims that these fragments alone can define the entire Macedonian language, something that this Petar Illievski guy tries to do. Using such scarcity to invalidate Tentov and Boshevski's systematic reconstruction is again intellectually very lazy. They did not build hypotheses on conjecture alone. They followed a rigorous scientific approach, which is the scientific method. And by that, I mean they categorize the symbols, then they wire them for sounds. So you would have from symbols, you would have sounds. From sounds, you would have syllables based on a different position you find those symbols in. You would attach a different vowel. So you would have the syllables. From there, you would get the words. And this produces results that are reproducible and historically coherent. How can you get all that? How can you manufacture or invent all that? If you start from the categorizing the symbols, getting the consonants, getting the vowels, getting the words, and getting all the syllables and the words after that, you cannot get the outcome if you start from where they started, where Macedonian academics started. Now that's first. Second, this critic or Petar Illievski conveniently ignores classical sources stating that the Macedonian language was unintelligible to the Danuos Hellenes or to the ancient Greeks. This is a fact explicitly recorded in ancient text. This is direct evidence that Macedonians was structurally distinct from Greek, and consonantal differences or the lack of different parallels in limited glosses cannot overturn this discovery. It's childish to think that it could. Third, Tentov and Boshevski did not claim to reconstruct the entire Macedonian language from a handful of inscriptions. Their work uncovers a previously unknown archaic layer of Macedonian preserved in the Middle Demotic text of the Rosetta Stone. Just because certain, sound shifts like BH to PH in Greek do not appear in a few words does not negate the validity of the methodology or of the results. You're just like, scientific method, Look, these words, they're not there, so what scientific method? Oh boy. Finally, the critic, this Petar Illievski guy, falls into the trap he himself condemns. Now, he's rejecting scientifically proven methods and results simply because they do not match preconceived assumptions that he has, or the mainstream has. The consonantal evidence cited is irrelevant to the overall reconstruction or the method of reconstruction that was applied. The methodology, historical context, and reproducibility of the results speak far louder than the absence of few Greek-like features that he just mentioned. This objection coming from Petar Illievski collapses under scrutiny, arguing from silence in a really fragmentary corpus is not scholarship. It is armchair speculation, guys. Tentov and Boshevski's work remains valid, rigorous, and scientifically defensible, while the critic exposes only his own inability to understand or engage with proper linguistic and scientific methodology. All right, so we have, let's see how many we got. We have one more objection from Petar Illievski to deconstruct, and I'll let you guys go. So he goes further to say, this interpretation of the personal names, especially of the theonyms, Tentov and Boshevski had made violence. Oh, they have broken them into descriptive terms, and theonyms are presented in forms unknown from other historical sources. In their conclusion on page 48, speaks about Osiris and Isis. They infer that their research diametrically differs in their part from positions of the contemporary scholars. The Greek names of the rulers and gods do not exist in the language of the ancient Macedonians, nor most probably in the language of the ancient Egyptians either. According to the authors, or the Macedonian academics, they are only descriptive translations of the symbolic meaning of the name from the language of the ancient Macedonians into the language of the ancient Greek. Professor Petar Illievski. Enough of that. This objection is nothing more than another classical argument from silence, or just ignorance. The claim that Tentov Boshevski made violence on theonyms, or the names of the gods, misunderstands both history and methodology. Many ancient names, especially theonyms, were inherently descriptive, reflecting the symbolic function of the deity or person. To portray this as an error is simply absurd. What are we talking about here? The supposed unknown theonyms in different places of the world or in other languages is historically explainable. We can explain this. If we use philosophy of science, we can infer to the best logical conclusion. Macedonians lost the wars with Rome. They lost the war with Rome. Rome being Machiavellistic. They took all precautions necessary to destroy their enemies, and it's not just that, they build upon successful acts of destruction. You got Carthage, the Macedonian ally. They destroyed Carthage. They destroyed most of the inscriptions. They tilted the soil so much and poured salt over that soil, so that people cannot come back and sow the land again. So they cleansed them for all eternity. Furthermore, when they met the Macedonians, they from what we know, they destroyed around 70-ish towns, Macedonian towns, that we know of. Imagine in that time what kind of destruction that was. They destroyed all the inscriptions, most of them, and they took around 150,000 people in slavery. So you would assume that most of them just ran in the mountains or ran northbound. So they did what they did in Carthage, but they did it even further. They build upon it. And a classical example of building upon that would be the Jews, when they were destroyed in 70 AD. They destroyed them completely. Jerusalem was razed to the ground, even worse than how Carthage was razed. And there was a completely new town that was built on with a magnificent temple, I believe, of Jupiter or some pagan deity. And not to mention that 1 million Jews were massacred at that time. 1 million, which later created the diaspora, which was logical. So you would have the Macedonians going up in north of Danube. Then we have monastic inscriptions where we have Bodrici family and different Macedonian families settling the Baltic, and later from the Baltic going to build Moscow and Novgorod. Hence we got the influence and creating of the Slavian culture, which Slavian, it actually means nothing more but glorious. And that comes from the glorious past of the Macedonians. Enough of that. Now, the supposed unknown theonyms, or the Greek god names, in different places of the world or in other languages is historically explainable. As I mentioned, Macedonians lost the war with Rome, their culture and inscriptions were systematically destroyed, and Greek koine, which was the lingua franca at that time, survived because the Romans themselves adopted that language as lingua franca, just as what Macedonians did before them. So why aren't you talking that the Romans were Hellenes? Because they also used the Greek language the same way Macedonians did. It is therefore expected that the original Macedonian forms largely vanished from mainstream records. Tentov and Boshevski's work is precisely about recovering these lost linguistic traces. And the evidence is there. The reconstructed theonyms appear within the language itself, embedded in archaic forms, preserved in modern Macedonian words. Crucially, these toponyms are not arbitrary. They correspond exactly to the function of the deity. For example, we have Lucha, the god of the sun spark, corresponds to the word Lucha, which means sun spark in Macedonian dialects. So the function of the god is his or her name. We have Sa, the god of planting. It comes from the modern Macedonian word Sadi, which means planting. This is not an invention, it's a semantic reconstruction grounded in linguistic evidence and historical context. Tentov and Boshevski are revealing the logic of a language that was systematically erased by the Romans primarily. They demonstrated continuity between ancient Macedonian and modern dialects in this way. To dismiss this as diametrically differing from contemporary scholars is both intellectually lazy again. How many times now? Intellectually lazy and historically uninformed. Science advances by recovering lost knowledge, not by slavishly defending Greek or Egyptian transliterations as if they were the only valid record. An example of a Greek transliteration of a Macedonian god is the name of the god Zeus or Zeus. It eerily resembles the Macedonian god of the sun, the god Ze. So we got Zeus and Ze. This critic, or Petar Illievski, attacks. So let me back up. This critic of Petar Illievski, it attacks the method because it challenges entrenched assumptions. So it's a bad thing to challenge entrenched assumptions. How dare you? It doesn't do it because it's flawed. It does it because it attacks entrenched assumptions. This is a definition of a gatekeeper. There's a galactic difference here. Now, this objection collapses under scrutiny again. Tentov and Boshevski do not invent names, they decode a lost language, recovering both meaning and historical context. The real error lies again with the critic, who refuses to confront methodology, evidence, or historical reality, and instead attacks descriptive functionality, and instead attacks descriptive, functionally meaningful reconstructions, as if their absence in surviving Greek or Egyptian sources invalidates scientific, rigorous research. And he knows better. He's a scientist himself. It's just that he's submissive. It wouldn't be too far-fetched to say communist. You know? All the objections collapse under scrutiny here. They rely on arguments from silence, selective reading, and strawman claims, while ignoring both scientific methodology and revealed historical context. Tentov and Boshevski followed a rigorous scientific approach, reconstructing sounds, syllables, words, and meanings, and their results are reproducible, linguistically coherent, and historically grounded. In other words, the results are always within the socio-religious context of the era of that stone. Now, thematic use or theonyms fail because they attack fragments. Let me back up. What I wanted to say is criticism about consonants and thematic use, or theonyms even, fail because they attack fragments, ignore the destruction of Macedonian cultural records, and dismiss the continuity visible in the language itself. The truth is clear. Tentov and Boshevski did not invent, they decoded a lost language. And the objections reflect intellectual laziness, not scientific error. Most of the thing, if not everything, that this guy, Petar Illievski, attacks our two Macedonian academics of doing, he's pretty much doing it himself. So, if something was not clear, I suggest you watch this video again, because there was a lot said here, and some of the claims are kind of, not that simple. But what is simple is the claims are not simple, because they're disingenuous, because especially if I'm coming from a scientific guy like Petar Illievski, and then when you just like apply critical thinking about these claims, you would simply get to the conclusion of how could have this guy done this, man? This is so disingenuous, because he neglects the scientific method applied by these scientists, the Macedonian academics. And so you will have all these critics coming, even more, but it's really easy to debunk them, because not because of my capabilities, because of the method that was applied and the results that were gained by the two Macedonian academics, Aristotle Tentov and Tentov Boshevski. So with that, I'll let you guys go. I know this probably is too much, and I hope you like this. If you want, you can support this channel. It's not easy. It's not easy to coming from work and trying to do this, trying to decipher, trying to test. But I love it. The one way of supporting this, you can like this video, you can subscribe, you can share, or even just grab a shirt from the online shop. It's a pretty cool shirt, man. And believe me, more things are coming. So with that, I'll let you guys go. Once again, thank you for sticking out this far, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out. All right.
Nazevo go